What if your car could tell you when to turn up the radio? Automakers in the past tried everything to make driving easier, creating some of the most bizarre features ever. We're about to uncover forgotten tech that predicted the future, including a system that talked to you 60 years early. 1. Vent windows. Before air conditioning was a standard thing in every car, staying cool on a hot day was a real challenge. You could roll down the main windows, of course, but that would often create a noisy, windy mess inside the car, blowing papers around and messing up your hair. Car designers had a brilliant and simple solution to this problem: the vent window. These were those small, triangular pieces of glass located at the front of the driver and passenger doors. They had their own little latch and could be pivoted open independently from the main window. The thing is, they were masters of airflow. You could crack one open just a little bit, and it would pull a gentle breeze into the cabin without all the drama of a fully open window. It was perfect for getting a little bit of fresh air on a cool day, or for smokers who needed a place for their smoke to escape. They were also great for defrosting the side windows in the winter. For decades, from the 1930s all the way into the 1980s, these little windows were a common sight on almost every car, truck, and van. But as automotive air conditioning became more affordable and more effective, the need for vent windows started to fade. Automakers also realized that getting rid of them made cars cheaper to build and a little more aerodynamic. Today, they are a piece of history, a reminder of a time when staying cool took a little more ingenuity. These simple little windows were a clever solution for airflow, but automakers had even weirder ideas for how you could control your car, including a button you had to stomp on with your foot. Second floor-mounted high beam switch. Imagine you're driving down a dark country road late at night. You have your high beams on to see as far as possible. Then, in the distance, you see another car approaching. You need to quickly dim your lights so you don't blind the other driver. Today, you would just flick a stalk on your steering column. But for most of automotive history, you did something completely different. You stomped on a button on the floor. For decades, the switch to control your high beams was a small, silver, rubber-covered button located on the floor to the left of the brake and clutch pedals. You see, it was a totally different way of interacting with your car. When you wanted to switch between high and low beams, you would just tap the button with your left foot. Click, high beams. Click, low beams. It was a very simple and sturdy design. There was no complex wiring in the steering column, just a basic switch on the floor. It was something you did without even thinking about it. Many people who grew up driving these cars found it to be a very natural movement. Truth be told, it worked perfectly well for a very long time. So why did it disappear? As cars started to get more and more complicated, with cruise control, windshield wipers, and other functions all being added to the steering column, it just made sense to move the high beam switch up there as well. It put all the lighting controls in one convenient place. Also, that little button on the floor was prone to getting gummed up with dirt, snow, and spilled soda, which could make it stick. By the 1980s, the floor-mounted switch was pretty much gone, becoming another quirky feature that new drivers will never get to experience. Moving the headlight switch to the steering wheel was about convenience. But the next feature we are going to look at was about fitting more people in the car, and it changed the entire front seat. 3. Front bench seats. There was a time when the front of a car wasn't divided into two separate bucket seats. Instead, it was one long continuous seat that stretched from one door to the other. This was the front bench seat, and for a huge part of the 20th century, it was the standard way cars were built. It was like a little sofa in the front of your car. The biggest advantage was obvious: you could fit 3 people in the front row. This was perfect for big families or for teenagers heading out on a Friday night. It made the car feel more open and social. The bench seat was also a key part of date night culture. It allowed you to sit right next to your sweetheart, making the car a much cozier place. What people don't notice is that the design of the bench seat also influenced other parts of the car. For example, the gear shifter had to be mounted on the steering column instead of on the floor to make room for that middle passenger's legs. This 3-on-the-tree manual shifter became an iconic part of classic cars, but the bench seat had its problems. One of the most shocking aspects was its lack of safety. In a crash, that middle passenger had no protection at all, and there was no good place to mount a third seatbelt. Bucket seats, on the other hand, offered much better side support and were much safer. As car interiors became more focused on the driver, with center consoles for storage and controls, the bench seats started to look old-fashioned. By the 1990s, they had all but disappeared from cars, though they hung on in some trucks and vans for a bit longer. Bench seats let you fit more people, but another forgotten feature made it way easier for those people to get in and out of the car in the first place, especially if they were wearing fancy clothes. 4. Swivel seats. Getting in and out of a car can sometimes be a little awkward, especially in a low-slung two-door coupe or if you're wearing a dress or a nice suit. In the late 1950s, Chrysler came up with a truly elegant and futuristic solution to this problem. They introduced swiveling front seats. With the pull of a lever, the entire front seat would unlock and pivot outwards, turning to face the open door. This meant you could just sit down on the edge of the seat, as if it were a chair, and then swing your legs into the car as the seat rotated back into a forward-facing position. It was an incredibly cool and sophisticated feature. It made entry and exit feel graceful and effortless. It was especially popular with women who found it much easier to get into the car without having to awkwardly hike up their skirts. It was a feature that screamed space-age luxury and convenience. For a few years, you could find these amazing seats on various Chrysler, Dodge, and Plymouth models. They were a major selling point and were often featured prominently in advertisements. But truth be told, they were also complicated and expensive to manufacture. The swivel mechanism added a lot of weight and complexity to the seat structure. And as car designs changed and people became less concerned with that specific type of entry and exit etiquette, the demand for them faded. They were a brilliant idea that was maybe a little too clever for its own good. They disappeared from the market by the early 1960s, leaving behind a legacy of cool futuristic design. Swiveling seats made getting in easy, but the next feature changed how you used the steering wheel itself, turning the whole thing into a single, giant button. 5. Rim blow steering wheel. For the longest time, if you wanted to honk your car's horn, you had to press a big button or a horn ring in the center of the steering wheel. It was a simple system that worked fine. But in the late 1960s, car designers were looking for new ways to make their interiors look more modern and streamlined. Ford came up with a really unique idea called the rim blow steering wheel. The idea was to get rid of the center horn button entirely. Instead, they built the horn switch into the inner rim of the steering wheel itself. The thing is, it was a very sleek design. The steering wheel looked clean and uncluttered without that big pad in the middle. To sound the horn, you didn't have to take your hands off the wheel to find a button. You could just squeeze any part of the soft rubber inner rim and the horn would blast. It was marketed as both a style and a safety feature, allowing for a quicker reaction time when you needed to warn someone. You could find it on many popular Ford, Lincoln, and Mercury cars, especially the muscle cars like the Mustang and Cougar. One of the most shocking things is that while it was a great idea in theory, it didn't work so well in practice. The soft rubber rim was exposed to the sun's heat and the oils from people's hands. Over time, the rubber would crack and harden, making the horn either stop working completely or, in some hilarious cases, get stuck on. There are many stories of people driving around with their horn blaring non-stop until they could pull over and disconnect it. Because of these reliability issues, the rim blow wheel was quietly phased out after just a few years. This feature tried to hide the horn in plain sight, but our next feature was all about hiding something else on the car, something much bigger that gave sports cars their iconic look. 6. Hidden headlights. There is nothing that screams classic sports car quite like hidden headlights. Also known as pop-up headlights, this was a design feature that dominated the coolest cars from the 1960s all the way through the early 2000s. The idea was simple but incredibly effective. During the day, the headlights were completely hidden from view. They were tucked away behind panels that sat flush with the car's body. This created a super smooth, sleek, and aerodynamic front end. Then, when you needed the lights, you'd flip a switch, and with a satisfying whir of electric motors, the headlight pods would rotate up into position. It was pure automotive theater. Cars like the Lamborghini Countach, the Ferrari Testarossa, the Chevrolet Corvette, and the Mazda Miata all became icons partly because of this dramatic feature. It gave the cars two distinct personalities, a sleepy, streamlined look during the day and an aggressive, wide-eyed look at night. Nobody can believe when it happened, but for a while, it seemed like every sports car had to have them. It was the ultimate symbol of futuristic design and high performance. So what happened to them? A few things led to their downfall. First, the electric motors and mechanisms required to make them work were complex, heavy, and prone to breaking. It was common to see an old sports car driving around with one headlight stuck up and the other one down, a condition fans call winking. But the biggest reason they disappeared was safety regulations. New laws about pedestrian safety made it much harder to have sharp, pop-up objects on the front of a car. Automakers also figured out how to make aerodynamic headlights using new plastics, so they no longer needed to hide them. Hidden headlights made the front of the car look clean, but another weird feature was designed to literally clean the headlights while you were driving. 7. Headlight wipers. Driving in bad weather is tough enough, but driving in bad weather at night is even worse. Your headlights can get covered in mud, snow, and road grime, which can seriously reduce their brightness and make it hard to see. Today, we have powerful headlight washer jets that can spray the lights clean. But back in the 1970s, some car companies, especially the safety-conscious ones from Sweden like Volvo and Saab, came up with a more direct solution. They put tiny little windshield wipers directly on the headlights. Truth be told, it was a very logical idea. If wipers work to keep your main windshield clean, why not use them to keep your headlights clean too? These mini wipers were attached to their own little motors and would sweep back and forth across the glass headlight lens, scrubbing away any dirt that was blocking the light. Some systems even included a washer fluid sprayer, just like a normal windshield wiper system. For people who lived in places with long, dark, and messy winters, this was a fantastic feature. It was a serious piece of safety equipment. What people don't notice is that this feature was mostly a European thing. You rarely saw them on American cars, but in Europe, they were quite common for a couple of decades. Eventually, though, they fell out of favor. The little motors and wiper arms were another thing that could break, and they added cost and complexity to the front of the car. As headlight technology improved, with new lens materials that were more resistant to dirt and the development of high-pressure washer jets, the need for a physical wiper blade disappeared. Wipers on the headlights were strange, but not as strange as a car that only had one headlight placed right in the middle of the car. 8. The Cyclops headlight. When you think of a car's face, you almost certainly picture two headlights, one on each side, like a pair of eyes. It's a design that has been standard for over 100 years, but what if a car only had one eye, right in the middle? That's the idea behind the Cyclops headlight, a feature that is one of the strangest and most revolutionary in automotive history. The most famous car to use, this was the 1948 Tucker, a car that was full of futuristic ideas. The Tucker had two normal headlights, but it also had a third headlight mounted right in the center of the grille. The thing is, this was not just for looks. It was a brilliant safety innovation. This center headlight was connected to the steering wheel. When you turned the wheel to go around a corner, the center headlight would turn with you, illuminating the road where you were about to go. It was a directional headlight, a feature that is only now becoming common on high-end luxury cars, almost 70 years after the Tucker introduced it. It was an idea that was completely ahead of its time, designed to help drivers see what was waiting for them around a dark bend. So why didn't this amazing feature catch on? The main reason is that the Tucker Car Company itself didn't last very long. They faced a lot of business challenges and only ever produced about 50 cars. One of the most shocking aspects is that some states at the time actually had laws that said a car could not have more than two headlights, so the feature was illegal in some places. The idea was so advanced that the world just wasn't ready for it, and the concept of a steering headlight was mostly forgotten for decades. A single steering headlight was a wild idea for seeing the road ahead, but our next feature was a much more basic item that used to be a given on every car, and its disappearance still frustrates drivers today. 9. Full-size spare tires. Getting a flat tire is one of the most annoying things that can happen to a driver. For most of automotive history, the solution was simple. You would open your trunk, and underneath the floor, you would find a full-size spare tire. It was a tire that was identical in every way to the 4 tires that were already on your car. You could change the flat, put on the spare, and continue your journey as if nothing had happened. You could drive on it for days or weeks at normal speeds until you had time to get your original tire repaired. It was a feature that provided total peace of mind. You knew that no matter where you were, a flat tire was just a minor inconvenience, not a trip-ending emergency. But if you've bought a new car in the last 10 or 15 years, you may have noticed that this trusty feature is gone. Many people are crazy about this change. When they open their trunk now, they are likely to find a skinny little donut spare, a tire that is much smaller and lighter than a regular one. These temporary spares are not meant to be driven on for long distances or at high speeds. They are just a temporary fix to get you to the nearest tire shop. So why did the full-size spare disappear? It all comes down to saving space, weight, and money. A full-size spare is big and heavy. By replacing it with a smaller donut, or in some newer cars, just a can of tire sealant and an air compressor, car manufacturers can make cars lighter, which helps them get better gas mileage. It also frees up more trunk space and saves them the cost of providing a 5th expensive wheel and tire. While it makes sense from an engineering standpoint, many drivers still miss the security of having a real spare tire. Having a real spare tire gave you confidence, but another, much stranger feature was designed to give you confidence when parking by using a set of metal whiskers. 10. Curb feelers. Long before we had backup cameras, parking sensors, and cars that can park themselves, drivers had a much simpler low-tech way to avoid scratching their shiny wheels and hubcaps on the curb. They used curb feelers. These were long, flexible wires or springs that attached to the lower part of the car's body, usually just behind the front wheel wells. They would stick out from the side of the car, and the tips would be set to the same height as the bottom of the curb. The idea was genius in its simplicity. As you were parallel parking, you would slowly approach the curb. Before your expensive white wall tire or chrome hubcap could touch the concrete, the tip of the curb feeler would make contact first. It would produce a loud, unmistakable scraping sound, screek. That sound was your warning signal. It told you that you were close enough to the curb and that you should stop turning. It was a purely mechanical and audible parking assistant. Truth be told, curb feelers were a huge part of the car culture of the 1950s, especially in the hot rod and custom car scenes. They were both a practical tool and a cool accessory. But as car design changed, they started to fall out of fashion. Modern cars have lower profile tires and plastic wheel covers that are less prone to damage. And of course, the invention of electronic parking sensors made the old-fashioned curb feeler seem ancient. You can still buy them today as a retro accessory, but their days as a common practical feature are long gone. Curb feelers helped you see what was on the side of your car, but our next feature was a clever gadget that helped you see something that was right in front of you, but was often blocked from view. 11. Traffic light viewer prism. In the 1940s and 50s, cars were designed with long hoods and low roofs. This looked cool, but it created a common problem. When you were the first car in line at a stoplight, the roof of your own car would often block your view of the traffic light hanging overhead. You would have to crane your neck and lean way forward to see when the light turned green. It was an annoying and uncomfortable driving quirk, but some clever inventor came up with a simple and elegant solution: the traffic light viewer. This was a small plastic prism that was mounted on top of the dashboard. It used the power of optics to solve the problem. The prism would capture the image of the traffic light above and bend the light down, projecting a small colored image of the light onto the face of the viewer. So, without having to move your head at all, you could just glance down at this little gadget on your dash and see if the light was red, yellow, or green. It was like a little periscope for traffic signals. One of the most shocking things is that this was never a factory-installed feature. It was an aftermarket accessory that you could buy at any auto parts store for just a couple of dollars. For a while, they were incredibly popular. You would see them in all kinds of cars. But as car designs changed, with more upright windshields and different rooflines, the problem of seeing the traffic light became less common. Eventually, these clever little prisms disappeared, becoming a forgotten solution to a forgotten problem. This prism used optics to solve a problem, but our next feature relied on a very different kind of science to power a key safety system, and it had a very strange side effect. 12. Vacuum-powered wipers. Today, your windshield wipers are powered by a dedicated electric motor. You turn them on, and they sweep back and forth at a consistent speed, no matter what you are doing with the car. It's a system we take for granted, but for a very long time, that's not how wipers worked at all. In many older cars from the 1930s up into the 60s, the wipers were powered by engine vacuum. The engine in your car naturally creates a vacuum as it runs, and engineers figured out they could use this vacuum pressure to run a small motor that moved the wiper arms. The thing is, it was a very clever way to power the wipers without needing a separate electric motor. It was cheap and simple, but it had one huge and sometimes funny flaw. The amount of vacuum your engine produces changes depending on how hard it's working. When the engine is just idling at a stoplight, it creates a lot of vacuum, and the wipers would move back and forth very quickly. But when you stepped on the gas pedal to accelerate up a hill, the engine would be working hard and the amount of vacuum would drop. This meant that your windshield wipers would slow down to a crawl or even stop completely, right at the moment when you needed them the most. Drivers of these cars got used to this weird quirk. They knew that if they needed to see during a rainstorm, they might have to lift their foot off the gas for a second to let the wipers catch up. Eventually, car companies realized that this was not a very safe or practical design. They switched over to using reliable electric motors, and the strange phenomenon of the shy windshield wipers faded into history. Wipers that stopped when you hit the gas were weird, but not as weird as a car that came with its own built-in record player, a feature that also had a problem with acceleration. 13. In-dash record player. Long before we had streaming music, satellite radio, or even cassette tapes, listening to your favorite tunes in the car was a real challenge. You were stuck with whatever the AM radio stations were playing. But in 1956, Chrysler had a revolutionary idea that was straight out of a science fiction movie. They introduced the Highway Hi-Fi, a real working record player that was built right into the dashboard of their high-end cars. This wasn't some cheap toy, it was a sophisticated piece of audio equipment. It used special 7-inch records that played at a super slow speed of 16 2/3 RPM. This allowed them to fit up to an hour of music on a single disc. The record player had a special tone arm and a suspension system that was designed to prevent the needle from skipping as the car went over bumps. For the first time ever, you could listen to your own personal music collection while you were cruising down the highway. It was an amazing piece of technology and the ultimate luxury feature for its time. But nobody can believe when it happened, but the system had some major flaws. Even with the special suspension, the needle would still skip if you went over a big pothole or took a corner too fast. The special records were also very expensive, and you could only get them from the car dealer. The selection of music was limited to whatever the record company decided to release in that format. The idea was incredible, but the technology just wasn't quite ready. After just a couple of years, Chrysler gave up on the idea. A record player in your dash was the height of 1950s cool, but another feature from the same era took luxury to a whole new level, offering a complete bar in your glove box. 14. Glove box minibar. The 1950s were a time of extreme luxury and glamour in American cars. Designers were adding chrome fins, powerful engines, and every creature comfort they could imagine. But the 1957 Cadillac Eldorado Bro-Am took things to a level that is almost unbelievable today. This was one of the most expensive and exclusive cars in the world at the time. To show off its status, it came with a list of features that were pure fantasy. One of the most famous of these was the magnetized minibar in the glove compartment. That's right. When you opened the glove box of this incredible car, you would find a beautifully crafted set of 6 silver tumblers, each with a magnet in its base. These magnets would hold the cups firmly in place on a metal tray, so they wouldn't slide around while the car was moving. The idea was that you and your passengers could enjoy a nice, cool beverage while you were being chauffeured around town. It was the absolute peak of high-class personal luxury. Of course, a feature like this tells you a lot about how much times have changed. The idea of having an open bar within arm's reach of the driver is something that would be completely unthinkable today, for very good safety reasons. Back then, the attitudes around driving and drinking were very different. The glove box minibar was not seen as a danger, but as a symbol of success and sophistication. The Eldorado Bro-Am was a very rare car, and this feature disappeared along with it, becoming a wild footnote in the history of automotive excess. A bar in the glove box was a wild idea from a different time, and so was our next feature, a strange and clumsy attempt at safety that everyone from the 80s remembers. 15. Automatic seatbelts. In the 1980s and early 90s, the government was pushing hard for car companies to improve safety. One of the biggest pushes was to get more people to wear their seatbelts. The solution they came up with was the automatic seatbelt, a feature that is remembered today as one of the most annoying and awkward inventions in car history. There were a couple of different designs, but the most common one involved a shoulder belt that was mounted on a motorized track along the top of the doorframe. Here's how it worked. When you open the car door, the shoulder belt would automatically motor forward, moving out of your way so you could get in. When you closed the door and turned on the car, the belt would whiz back along the track, draping itself across your chest. The idea was that it was a passive system. You didn't have to do anything. The car put the seatbelt on for you. The problem was, you still had to manually buckle the separate lap belt, so it wasn't really automatic at all. What people don't notice is that these systems were often clumsy and slow. They were also famous for trying to catch you as you got in or out of the car, and if the motor broke, you were stuck with a seatbelt that didn't work at all. It was a weird in-between technology that existed only because automakers were trying to meet the letter of the law without having to install more expensive airbags. Once airbags became standard, the need for these strange motorized seatbelts disappeared overnight, and everyone was happy to see them go.